Well, hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, in charge of product management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined by Dion McCormick, no relation, who is our lead solutions engineer. We're going to begin with a demo like we always do, and then afterwards we will be here to take your questions. So go ahead and type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's begin. Hello, Dion. Are you there? Let me just take you off mute.
There we go. I just had to do an unmute. Hey, am I coming through okay?
You sure are. Let me go ahead and make you a
Great.
presenter.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for taking time to visit with us this week. As Dave mentioned, I have a really cool little demonstration, something I put together with a client a while back, and I wanted to go into a little bit more detail and show you how it worked, how I put it together, and how I approached it. Along with that, obviously, we're here to answer any questions you may have. So take the time to go to your GoToWebinar control panel, put in those questions into the questions section, and Dave will be monitoring those, and we'll try to get to as many as possible during this presentation today. But again, thank you for taking the time to visit with us. It's great stuff. Just want to give you a heads up real quick is that we have coming up the Alpha DevCon in October, and I just want to let you know I just yesterday booked my tickets, and I'll tell you, Southwest Air has these mad discounts right now. So if anybody's looking to get their tickets, go check out Southwest. And they aren't paying me. They didn't give me discount fares, but they're having some very powerful sales on right now. And I was able to pick up an incredibly cheap ticket to get into the Rhode Island area. So go check on it there. And if you haven't, go to the Alpha DevCon 2017 site at alphasoftware.com. DevCon 2017. You can register for it. You can also look at the agenda, the speakers we have, and the training, and also the fun contest that's going to be at the presentation. So we look forward to seeing you there. Again, great time apparently to book tickets because once Southwest goes that way, most people tend to be very competitive, and I'm finding some just great deals and getting up there for a song. It's really good. Leaves me more money to, I don't know, we'll see. Buy more songs.
Buy one of the nice houses they have in Newport.
Exactly, just something on the coast so I can go visit whenever I get a chance. I know my free time there. Anyway, well, today, thank you very much for joining us. First, I want to go over the first part and talk about a really cool thing I put together, which was a lot of fun, that involved Google Places. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, show you how I put it together, show you what you can do with it. And it's just a very, very cool API that's available, very easy to use, and one that's super duper powerful. So let's start out with first, what is Google Places? Google Places is a API and essentially a connector into Google's massive database of 100 million places across a wide range of categories, etc. These are the information on all the different businesses and all the information they've been collecting, think kind of Foursquare-ish kind of data, you know, and all this populates their existing systems like Google Maps and Google Plus and things along those lines. But what's great is you can tap into this and use it for location-aware business. So an example and where this came from is I had a client that was using Alpha and had developed Alpha, a CRM, a customer relationship management system, that their salespeople were using in the field. And so their salespeople would use Alpha to go out in the field and engage with their clients, their existing clients, and these were retail-oriented clients. And while they were in the field, the sales management team said, hey, we need more clients. You know, there's a lot of retail locations that are not buying our product. So they had the conundrum of, well, how do they guide and help their people to be efficient? And they thought, well, geez, we have this great system out in the field. We have these people already driving around and going from customer to customer, servicing them and working with them. Why don't we figure out a way where if they're in an area, we can provide them targets to go after while they're out on the road. And it turned out Google Places was ideal for this because what it allowed you to do was basically grab and say, okay, in this specific area, grab any locations that are near me of a certain type. So they could actually filter it using the API on the kind of locations they were looking for, in this case specific types of retailers. And the beauty of that is now these people out in the field, when they have an extra 15-20 minutes, they pull up their CRM system with Alpha and they bring it up and they can look and say, hey, yeah, there's a potential candidate here, or even someone they've met before, you know, and they can go out and go after it and do a initial meet and greet. And what they're finding out is because it's so easy and all this information is at the salesperson's fingertips, A, there's no excuses for them not to do, and B, now that they're doing it, they're seeing an increase in locations because they have more touch points out in the field. And that's the game with sales, is the more touch points you have, the more sales you're going to generate. It's just simple math. And now they can be driving their sales team to be out in the field, grabbing more and more potential contacts, which will turn into business as they go. So with that, the idea is we just connect it into Google API. In this case, it's a server-based solution, which I'm going to show you today. But let me talk a little bit more about Google API. So it allows you to add location power to your app. So Alpha already has an enormous amount of capability around mapping and geolocation and finding where you're at, but now you can add in the power of the Google API, Places API, to actually bring together and give you information about what's around you and manipulate that. So you've seen Google API behind the scenes is when you actually look up a location in Google, they're actually going into their map, their Places API, and they're pulling up information. So in that API is not only a location and a name and a business type, but also their hours, their specific address, their information. And they've just been accumulating this for years and years, and it gets better and better and better as it goes along. So they use it themselves, but now you can have that behind the scenes powering your applications, which are really powerful. Now, how does it work? So this is your front end here. I'm going to walk you through how to do this. So this would be a front end that you would build. This is a straight mapping interface, but this could be any kind of interface. I mean, it's really up to you to define it. But what happens is in this particular scenario, we do a callback to the app server, and we give the app server the location the person is at. So using our geolocation capabilities and built-in, we can grab the data and say, oh, you're at latitude X, longitude Y, and they can send that back to the app server. The app server grabs that information, calls the Google API. The Google API retrieves and returns a set of data that is then processed and then resubmitted back to the field, out in the field. And the beauty of this is that you can manipulate that data from Google API. So the Google API is going to give you a massive amount of information, as much as you want or as little as you want. But now you can form that in the app server and reuse that on the front end. And I'll show you a little bit of how that works from that standpoint there. So very, very cool. And what we're going to use to make this magic occur is the amazing curl to Xbasic Genie. So basically, you're going to have to write a web service call to the back end, but here's the cool thing, Alpha does it for you, and so that you don't have to. And so we're going to walk through how we use that to do that from that standpoint there. To give you an idea is that the API is actually pretty simple. So a lot of text here, but this will explain what's going on here from that standpoint. We're going to have to clean that. I shouldn't really put my key in here. That's probably bad. Oh, well, I'll change my key tonight. So if you get any ideas, don't worry about it. So the idea behind it is that you have a call that goes to the Google Map API, and you'll see it's googleapis.com, Maps API Place. Then you have a set of commands, in this case a nearby search, and then you submit this information here, which is your location, lat and longitude, the radius, how far away from where this point you want to grab it, the types, the name, if there's a specific type of name, and then you have to pass it your unique key that Google provides you. So you have to sign up, and that way they can control how many times you're doing it, and there's certain limitations around that. So it's a fairly straight URL, and what's great is now Alpha is going to make that easy for me to generate that into Xbasic to run this information there. So what I'm going to do for the balance here is I'm going to show you how I can basically take this API, turn into it, and something more interesting is actually turn it into location data. So I'm going to go back into my Alpha environment, and for people who are new, Let's see, why is that there? Okay. When we so we're back here. We're in the alpha development environment. I have a little sample project here, and I'll go through it and show you there. So just to show you a example of how this works, and I'll go ahead and open this up and show it there. Just a process check. Is everything working okay there?
Yes, it sure is.
Yeah. So I have a really cool, very simple set where I feed it that information. So you'll notice this is a UX control, which is a form control. And in there, I'm going to feed it the latitude, the longitude, the radius, the type of location I want to get, any specific name to filter by, and then my key. And then I have a button here. When I click that button, it takes this information and calls that API. Now, this does something interesting is I actually take that, and I'm not going to go to too much detail, but when that data comes back, I actually insert it into a database and then refresh a grid that will show you that. So let me go ahead and show you how this works here. So you'll see I have a latitude, a longitude, a radius, a type of it. I could put in a name, but I'm not particular. Actually, let me do a live preview. It's a little easier. It looks nicer here. So let me go back over here. We'll do this. Wait till it starts here. Sorry, I just had my stuff going on there. So we'll go in here and do this here. Okay, so I have my lawn, and then down here I have an embedded grid. So this is the UX here, and then this is an embedded grid. And all this grid is doing is it's attached to a table. And in that table, I take the result information back from Google, dissect it, and insert it into the table. And I'll show you why in a moment. So when I click Add Places, what it's going to do is clear out what's in here, run the call to the API, and then reinsert. So when I go here, you'll notice that, and I have, I'm going to go ahead and scoot and let it go through. Oh, there we go. I just had a debug in there. And so now it's refreshed this data right down here. And what's cool is it'll refresh it with whatever current information is in the back-end database. So if you have a situation where, or in the API, if they've added a new location, you're going to get that information here. And so this is just data in my database. Now, since I have a grid here, I'm using the built-in grid mapping capability to allow me to see a map of those locations. Give me a moment as it renders this map here. Let's just do this and map my place. There we go. And it's actually, I have to kind of expand out. Oh, man, I've been having problems. I have a pre-release, and I apologize. Let me go ahead and do this real quick. Bear with me. So much for the stunning demo there, but I've just been I've been running a pre-release, and my API is giving me a hard time. So
Yeah,
not something.
Dan. Jeez.
I know, it's embarrassing. There we go. Oh, so it's something. It didn't like that there, so I'm throwing a JavaScript error. But you saw for a moment there. Yeah, it's something that's just in the latest pre-release it's gave me. But what you can do is you can actually take the data in your database and put it right in a map. And so this is using the built-in grid one, but you can also, which is very powerful, is you can use the client-side mapping on the mobile device. So this is kind of more of a desktop metaphor, but it's very easy for you to go in and then also send this data back to the mobile device, and the mobile device can use client-side templating, even a data series, to map it on the mobile device. But the magic here is it takes my input values, it runs a Google API, and then off to the races. It will allow you to see that data. So let's walk through how I did that. So first I want to show you is when I click this button, Add Places, I run a function on the server called Add Places. So like my design over here, in here, when I click the button, it's going to call the server, give it my parameters, and then the server is going to call Google Places, and in this case, grab the data and extract it and put it into the database. But it's up to you how you want to use that there. So you'll see on my server side, if I go to my Xbasic functions, I have that Xbasic function. I first grab the data from the front-end user interface, and that's where I have my debug here. I then have created, and I'll show you how I created a little piece of code that then I take that information in here, and then once that information comes back, Then I have it, and then I can, in this case, I'm inserting it into a database. So don't worry too much about this code. This is all just taking the data back from mine. I'm going to show you how I generate my code to actually call Google Places and show you how it only takes a few minutes to do so. And then once I do that, I refresh the information from there. So let's go ahead and show you how that works. So let's go back to, first and foremost, to my top secret URL. So this is, I got this directly from from Google. Google gives you an examples of how to put together this URL. So I can basically take this information and I can go back in here, and I'm going to go ahead and, for now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new UX. So I'm going to create a new UX, okay, and I'm not going to particularly grab any format. I just want a blank one for right now. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add two things. I'm going to add a button in here, and that button's going to be call Google API. And then I'm going to also put in here a text area, and I'll go results. So the idea is, for now, I'm just going to do a very simple example where I'm going to call the API and just show the results there. So let's make the width of that baby 100%. So it comes out there, and the rows, let's make that 10 rows. Okay. So right now it doesn't do anything, but what I want to do is when I click this button, I want to call a function on the back end and then spit out the results right in here. So I'm going to go to this button, I'm going to double click on it. That opens up my action JavaScript here. I'm going to click add new action, and I'm going to type callback because I want an AJAX callback. I'm going to select AJAX callback and click OK. The function I'm going to call it, I'm just going to call it anything you want, but in this, I'm going to call Google Places. That's the name of the function. Now I could just go here and go in there, but we actually, one thing that's nice about Alpha is that it's going to create a prototype function, meaning one that's ready to go. So I'm going to click on here, and you'll notice that it created a function for me with a whole bunch of sample text, which is very helpful to start with. So I'm just going to copy that to the clipboard. I'm now going to click this Open Xbasic Function Declarations, and I'm going to paste it, and that just pastes it right in this window right here. And then I'm not going to make any adjustments. There's a lot of ways you can use additional data. You could also submit location information, which is nice because that may be what you want to use is that lat and lon position, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. Okay, so now when I call this button, it's going to call a function on the back end, and then what I want that function to do is call out Google and then put the results and results here. So let me go back to Xbasic functions here. This is where we paste that data in there. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, and in here I'm going to put my code to actually call the URL. So what I'm going to do to make that easy is, let me go back in here, and I've got that saved already. Dun, 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 where is it? Oh, no. Hold on, I'm just going to jump around for a moment. It's annoying, but let's see, Xbasic module. Eventually you're going to want to put this stuff into an Xbasic module. Okay, wait, oh, never mind. Okay, let me go back here. Okay, so I'm just copying this sample API here, okay, and now I'm going to go back into my UX here in this call Google Places. So the idea, just to make sure I'm in clear, so let's save this as call Google API underscore UX, is that when this button is clicked, it's going to call this server action. In here I want to call the API, and then I want to set the results in there. So I could go ahead and look up in Alpha. You could custom code a call to create a web service by hand, but Alpha has a really neat feature. If you right click, now this is very important, is I'm right clicking in my white space right here and going down to Genies. So again, I right clicked in here and went down to Genies. You'll see there's a new one here called, well, it's actually been out for a couple releases, but curl command Xbasic. And it opens up this little window here. And what curl is, for people who's not familiar with it, there's a lot of documentation online. It's basically a way in a command line to simulate a browser calling a service. So it's a way to do things via command line, which is very handy. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to type, and by the way, we have a whole bunch of examples in here that you can look at, and you can do a lot of things with curls. You can do get and post transactions, delete. You can also do FTP calls. I mean, it's pretty crazy. And there's actually something called the curl command there. So go from here. So I'm going to type in curl, and I'm pasting in that URL we had there before. So let me go back. I typed the word curl and then just typed in that. And this is a pre-made hard-coded one that I happen to do that. So I'm going to say generate Xbasic, and in a moment Alpha is going to call the service, look at it, and generate my Xbasic to make this call. And so it's done, it's wrote the code for me. So I'm going to copy this to clipboard. I'm going to click OK, and you'll notice it's pasted it right in here. So I had my function, and now it's written everything for me. Now this is a pre-made function, so I'm going to make a few adjustments here. But let me walk you through what it's doing. I'm not gonna, this isn't an exhaustive review of it, but it's doing what's called, it's saying up a curl init. So it uses curl to make the call. So you'll see that it sets it up, then it passes in the URL. It also passes in a whole bunch of other options, and over time as you get to know them, you can use these things to adjust them. So for instance, this is an HTTPS call, and so they have to pass in a certification and do those things there. Now here's the magic. Once all of this is set up here, then it does what's called the CE exec. And when it does this exec, that's what actually makes the call to Google and returns the results. And then it says if the results are true, flag 1 is true, then it extracts that data. If it's false, it grabs what the error is and displays the error. Now, this is meant to be run standalone. So you'll see it says right here, show var. Well, that's not exactly what we want because we're not going to run it. So what we need to be able to do is say e._set.results.value is equal to message. So instead of showing the variable, what I'm going to do is set the value of that text box I created on there to message. And down here, I'm going to go and do the same thing, but if it has a problem, I'm going to do errors there. So again, what happens is you click the button, it starts running this, it sets up the call, in this case a hard-coded call, and then what it does, which is cool, is then it does a, then it grabs the results out and gives me the results. So let me do this. I'm going to put a radius of 1500 there to make it a little bigger. So let me click save, and let's give this a try real quick. So I'm going to go into my working preview. You're going to see I have my button here, my results, they're empty. So I'm going to click Call Google API, and in a moment, if it works correctly, here's my results. So it's put in this headers thing, but here is the content. This is what's been returned back from there. So you'll notice if we walk through it nice and slow, you'll see here's our first record, here's the latitude and longitude, a viewport which is used for mapping purposes. Okay, here's the name of the business, here's the opening hours if they have that information in it. Here are some photos that are available. So you notice they give us an enormous amount of data back, which is really, really cool. This is the place ID right here, which is Google's unique identifier for this place. So if you wanted to call back and do other things with it, you could do that. The rating, reference information, here's the type of information that this, so it's a combination of a travel agency, restaurant, food. It's in the vicinity of this. So as you can see, now it's done that. Now we're on to the second result right here. So as you can see, we have our second result called Rhythm Boat Cruises. Here are my photos for it. And here's the rating and the place ID, etc. So as you can see, within a matter of a few moments, I created a full-blown API call here. Now, you'll notice in here, so obviously if you have any questions on this, please put them in there, but I'm going to show you how to further handle this and use it a little better. First, you'll notice that I kind of have hard-coded in here this information right here. So I'd rather say, you know, instead of type of food, instead of having that hard-coded, I want to have that be a variable, meaning that I want to be able to, let's make the name variable. So let's say I wanted to have the name variable, where I'd still look at the same location and the same radius and the type of information, but I want the name, instead of the word cruise here, to be something I pass in. So let's go back into my controls here. I'm going to insert a text box, and I'm going to call this name. And I'm going to go ahead and go up, and I'm going to go ahead and in here I'm going to default this right now to be cruise. Okay. And what I want to do is when I click this button now, instead of hard coding it, I want to grab this name, whatever's in there, and run the code. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my Xbasic functions here. I'm going to go to the top here, and I'm going to go dim name as C, and then I'm going to go name is equal to e.data submitted dot name. Okay, so basically I created a variable there, and then what I'm going to do is using the e.data submitted, it's going to grab whatever the value of that name field is and put it into this variable. Now what I want to do is down here, instead of having it hard coded, I'm just going to use the classic dun, 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 dun. I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to close off with a quote, and I'm going to go plus name plus there. So very simple, but what I'm going to do is I have my URL here, but it's now going to be dynamic because it's going to take whatever that value of that name is, insert it, and then use that full URL. So let's go ahead and give that a try. So I'm going to click Save. I'm going to go Working Preview. And let's say the name is Donut. Maybe there's a donut one up there. The donut's in the name. So it does a call now, and you'll see I did find some stuff. And let's see, what was the name? Did I pass by the name? Yep.
Donut time.
Donut time. Yep. Or my favorite, everybody, taco. If I click there, it's going to find anyone with a name of taco. So interesting, Mexico. That's interesting. Must have known the type. Let me go down here. Yeah. So interesting. It found some other ones, but they're all taco joints. So it must be smart enough to understand the type of location. Let me go down here. There's Barrio Cellar, etc. So now these are all a list of joints that have taco in there. And name must be the types food. I see. It's type of food, and the name to look in that food category is there. And Google API has massive documentation on how to use this. Now, I could go in here, and if I wanted to, I could put in lat, lon, type, etc. Make these fields right here. And I'm not going to do it here, but I've created those data entry points here. And then I can go to my server side here. I'm sorry, my Xbasic function. I can go back here, and then I can say, for instance, dim lat as C. I'm just doing them as C. They could be numerical values you want. And then you go, lat is equal to e dot data submitted dot lat. Lon is equal to e dot data submitted dot lon. And then down here I could change lon and lat right there and dynamically build up the location using that information there. So it's a very simple, once you kind of got the basic structure, you can adjust those things here. Now I want to show you one other thing. You'll notice when I run this that the data comes back as a real big large set of JSON, which is nice. That's JSON. But what I want to do is if I wanted to extract information out of this, like I wanted to extract the rating or something like that, it's kind of hard. You could do it by doing some extraction, but I'm going to show you a real trick here. So I'm going to go back in here, and up here I'm going to go and I'm going to say dim result pointer as P. So I'm creating what's called a result pointer as a pointer variable. And so what I'm going to go down here is, you'll notice that after it runs this, if it's true, here is the contents. That's that actual JSON. So now what I'm going to do is in here I'm going to go results pointer is equal to JSON parse, and this is called contents. Now we've gone into a lot of these functions in our master class, actually our certification for web APIs. I went into a much more detail than I'm going to go today. So if you haven't had a chance to take that class, it's again the web API certification. We go through this at a much lower level of detail, but I wanted to kind of show you how to do this. But there's some built-in functions that will allow you to take JSON and turn it into a pointer and vice versa. So I'm going to go right here and I'm going to go debug 1 and I'll show you what's going on. So now I click save. Everything else is going to basically work the same. And I'm going to go back to taco. Getting hungry. So I'm going to go like this. It's going to run it. it ran that, and you'll notice flag 1 is true, which means that it ran successfully. After it ran, it got the headers and the contents. So here's my content, which is that JSON string here, all that information you saw on the screen. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this command that's going to take that incoming JSON and turn it into a pointer. So I'm going to step, and now what I'm going to do is over here I'm going to download that. So now look what I have here. If I open up this result pointer, you're going to see that it's taken each item that comes back. So each one of these is a separate record that it found. So for notice, it has the Mexico, Contrabanda Latin Restaurant, Barrio Cellar, Las Vidas. And if I dig into this even a little closer, you'll see now I can go into, let's say, the name here. You'll see that for me to grab the name of the first record that came back, I can use this nomenclature here. So instead of doing something like writing a whole bunch of text parser to go in and grab that, you just turn it into a pointer, and now the pointer can do it. And the cool thing with a pointer is you can go through and loop through you can get the number of results and loop through them and manipulate it. So when I insert stuff into the database, what I do is I grab the contents back from Google, put it into a result pointer, find out how many items came back. So you'll notice in here in results that it brought back, in this case, 20 items. Then I run a loop and I just grab the data out each of these items and insert them into the database, and boom, then they're now in the database. And that's really cool because in the case of this one client, what they do is they sat there and said, you know, when people are out in the field, I want them to be able to just see the data and act on it. I don't want them to sit there and have to wait for the system. Let's say they're offline or something like that. So what they do, which is really cool, is they run a process that grabs all this data, puts it into a temporary data table, and then they have a list on the mobile device that is offline capable that allows them to pull that data down, and then the person can be out in the field with no connection, they don't have to have a connection to Google, to the back end or everything, and they have all that information local. So there's some very innovative things you can do it. So I just want to add that last piece. We're going to go over to the question and answer section now. Excuse me. But as you can see, the real heart of this, and I want to go back to it just for a moment, was when I went in here. Let me go ahead and let's go here, and we'll copy that out here. When I went in here to my function that I created, I used my curl command Xbasic, where I typed in curl and that URL and generated it. And boom, what happened is it did all this writing for me. And then I went in and just added the ability to like dynamically change, in the case, the name, the food, the other pieces there. So all of this coding was done for me. So it took a job that would have taken an hour or two to kind of figure it all, get it structured, into a matter of a few minutes. Now I can focus on the functionality of what I want to do by adding variables and stuff like that instead of writing the code. And this works great because if you'll notice, if you go to a lot of APIs out there, for instance, here's an example. Let's say you wanted to hook up to Dropbox. So let's go to Dropbox API. And let's say you want to connect into Dropbox API. Okay, if you go to their documentation here, which is really cool, and they have really good documentation here, you can go into the HTTP section, if I'm not mistaken here. They have all the different endpoints and everything you can call from them, and it goes through and gives you examples of how it works. Like, see, there's the example with OAuth, etc. But you can just take these examples and use curl. And in fact, let me do this, Dropbox API curl. They often have curl examples already made, so you can literally copy and paste those curl examples and not have to do it. So let's see, this is still doing it, so bear with me. There's an example using curl. So here's the curl request right here. So you can grab that, look at it, and then Alpha will take this and turn that into a Xbasic that is then easy for you to manipulate. So whenever you're looking at an API, see if they have curl examples, and if they have curl examples, then you can use this really easy trick to go ahead and just use the curl to Xbasic Genie, and your job will become much easier. And I've done that with weather APIs, stock market APIs, Dropbox. There's everybody who has an API out there usually gives you examples in curl, because curl is kind of this universal way. You don't even have to build a system to actually test it out. You can use their command line, and there's a lot of functions that will allow you to turn them from curl into Xbasic or into your target language. So I'm going to go ahead and hold it here. I hope this was of interest here. Sorry about the mapping thing. Gotta get that fixed, guys. It's a little touchy because of the APIs. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Dave. And Dave, we got APIs.
Right. We do not have many questions. I am sorry to report. We have a lot of attendees here, so...
Good. Well, maybe it was so crystal clear there's just no questions answered, or maybe it was so boring. Just, let me stop him talking by not asking a question.
we do have one question, which was, what was the cost of the API for the Google API? And free. Although there is sort of a caveat. They do make money if you are going to use it in an internal application. Then you need to have a paid subscription with Google. And in some cases, that can be expensive. And you may want to look at some other folks that I know who have done projects have found Bing to be a less expensive service for mapping.
Right.
Like and about a third of the price.
Foursquare has opportunities.
Has one as well. Okay, wonderful.
Yep.
But if it's public facing, or it's no problem at all. You can also build it into apps that are delivered in the App Store. And you can charge for those apps, but as long as there's no subscription or service that you're charging for besides, it's still allowed. Actually grabbed the, let's see, I think I have the URL for that one, and that I can paste into the chat window. In the meantime, that would be a great time to hear from your questions. Okay, so
excellent.
I'll put that in the chat window for anyone who wants it. Here's a good one. How can the latitude and longitude be picked up automatically on an Alpha mobile app? You know, kind of like Uber or Yelp or one of those places. It knows your location. How do you do that?
Great. There's actually two ways you can handle that. And let me go ahead and go into my UX here. There's two ways to handle that. One, if you're using PhoneGap, they have something called background geolocation. So you can actually have the system grabbing the background information and recording that automatically. And that's just a little piece of JavaScript that works with a PhoneGap plugin. And you'll see that, examples of that are like Uber and Lyft, where you'll notice that, these people have their phones in their vehicles, and as they're driving along, the system is updating the back end for Uber and Lyft, and then that back end is sending it to the potential rider saying, hey, here's where your car's at, here's where it's coming here. Now, the other method here is built-in Alpha is a whole bunch of pre-made action JavaScript to allow you to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click here to add a button. Let me go ahead and go up to the top here. And I don't want that. I'm sorry. Let me go ahead and go physically here. I'm going to add a button. Go here, and I'm going to say get location. Okay. And now I'm going to go into this button, get location. I'm going to add a new action, and I'm going to type the word geo. There are some built-in geolocation functions. So again, I opened up my action, used action JavaScript, and looked for geolocation. By the way, we also have built into it geocode, which will automatically geocode, take an address and turn that into a Latin line. So I'm going to go ahead and double-click to select geolocation functions, set fields to retrieve data, and I'm going to set the latitude to be latitude. So basically what I'm doing in here, I'm matching what's going to come back to what is my field in here. You don't have to do that, but you can. So I'm going to take the latitude and put it in my LAT field, and then longitude, I'm going to put it in longitude. So now I have a field map. Now, kind of cool is that it also records a whole bunch of other stuff, like for instance, heading, speed, timestamp, etc., which you can also. So you can not only grab the person's latitude and longitude, but a whole bunch of other data that is maybe potentially interesting to your application there. And then you can also get accurate position within a designated radius. That means if you need more and more accuracy, you can literally tell it that I need it to be accurate within 15 meters or 5 meters. I think 3 meters is the maximum accuracy. Now the trade-off is the more accurate it is, the longer it takes to return the value. So if you say, I just need to know within a half mile or a quarter mile, it's going to come back very quickly because it can do a rough estimation. But if you're trying to get it down to a very tight tolerance, it takes longer. So that allows you to change that. And then you can also force it to update on location change. You can say if they move so far away from this location. So this is really, really, really cool. You can also do a callback function name, is that after the data is returned, it's going to actually call a function to maybe update the back-end system. Essentially like Uber, is that after a certain amount, it calls back and updates the back-end database. Very cool stuff here. But all I'm going to do is just set the values of that and click OK. So that's it. So I used my geolocation function. I just retrieved the data fields. I could do all these other things here, and I'm going to click Save. So let's give that a try. Do a work here. And I might have to run, actually, you know what? I think I'm going to need to run this actually in the browser because it uses the browser in this case for the location data. On a mobile device, it's by default going to be able to access that hardware. Again, the user will be asked if they will allow to do that. In a PhoneGap app, they're going to be asked one time, and if the person says yes, then they'll store that. If they're in a web browser, it's going to ask them each time because it's a security issue of allowing people to know where you're at. So I'm running this in my local web browser. So I'm going to click Get Location, and notice it's asking me, will you allow this person to access it? I'm going to go ahead, and you could remember this. I'm going to go ahead and say Allow, and you'll notice there's my location. And so that's 30.33. Negative 97.86. Not sure. I must have some not a valid number. I'm not sure there. But what's great about that is now I can just sit there and click here, and it's going to take that information, run my thing, and update my grid. Notice that within that location, within 1,500 for hardware stores, it found 110 places, and it put them in my database. So you'll notice. Let me click that ad again. You'll see it's run it, and in a moment you'll see this grid get refreshed. Oh, found 130. Oh, I'm not deleting them as I go. So let me go ahead and delete them all. So let's see if it works if on this case, if I'm running it in the browser. Not sure if it will here, so yeah, not helping me today. So that's your answer, is basically you can use either the background geolocation in PhoneGap, or you can use the geolocation functions here. As you can see, they're very flexible, very powerful for you to create it. And we've seen people, and why we added a lot of, there's 2 examples I'd like to share with you why this is so extensive instead of just giving you what your current location is. First, there was a company that works with Alpha that has lifeguards, and what they've developed is a mobile app that allows lifeguards to check in when they get to their work location. So they get to your local pool and they check in. Well, they wanted to make sure that the person, when they checked in, wasn't at the local Starbucks hanging out. So they actually had a record of where their location should be, and then in the check-in, they got an accurate, and if the check-in wasn't close enough to the location, it said, no, I'm not going to allow you to check in, and start clocking hours against that. The other is that they wanted to be able to have mobile people out in the field that allow them to, as they are, they wanted to notify clients. This was another application where, let's say, well, in this case, they had repairmen that were heading out to a customer. So what they would do is they would get the information, and what would happen is that they would know where that delivery person is, or in this case a maintenance person. They knew where the location was. They could approximate the amount of time, so they could literally send a text message to the client saying that the person's 15 minutes away or so. And this allowed them to get, if you'll notice, they could get the latitude, the speed. So if the speed was 0, well, that's not good, but if they had a speed, they were able to handle all that, and that all handles from there. And again, the user's going to have to approve that on their mobile device, but it allows you to do that and allows you to create very easy to use, powerful interfaces with those pieces there. A little bit
Fantastic.
long-winded, but there's a huge amount in this one little simple thing, this little form right here. It's amazing how much technology is underneath that.
Great. Thank you very much. A couple of people had commented that using PhoneGap works really well in grabbing the device's latitude and longitude. And then someone asked another question, sort of PhoneGap related, and that was really about Alpha Launch. And with Alpha Launch, do you need to have PhoneGap?
Interesting. Well, the answer is no. Well, no, because the Alpha Launch allows you to run the app. You publish the web server, and Alpha Launch itself is a PhoneGap app. So think of it as a pre-coded app ready to go that's going to, a shell that's going to run your application. And inside that shell, we've already added a whole bunch of PhoneGap plugins, the most common ones that people have been using. And we'll be enhancing Alpha Launch as we move along in more and more details. So we're going to add more plugins, we're going to add easier ways to handle security. That's all in process and being worked on, so it's very exciting.
And we're going to do a separate presentation on Alpha Launch, but I don't know that we've spoken about it before during one of our webinars. And so if not, and if you weren't here when we did, Alpha Launch is a way of deploying your mobile applications while bypassing the Apple and the Google Play Store, so you can get it right onto an app. And the way it does that is that Alpha Launch itself is an app that lives in the Google Play and in the Android stores. I've put a link to it. It's a brand new thing from us. Came out with Alpha Anywhere 4.4.4, so that's a couple weeks old at most. And I put links to our documentation that Sarah has provided us into the chat section if you want to take a look at that, or you could just go to our documentation section and go to Alpha Launch, and it explains all of that. Definitely worth checking out if you're doing any sort of mobile development. This question I like a lot, and this person is asking here, using mapping, can we include in a mobile app the functionality to locate another employee's location in comparison to my own location, whether they're moving or stationary?
Absolutely, and this is really cool. That's really fun. So a couple kind of background on that is that first, let's go ahead and go back over here and just show, so we can show kind of the scenario here. So a couple different ways to approach that is that first and foremost, you think about it, you need to know the data from both devices, because then once you have the data from both devices, you're able to do a comparison and determine distance and all those kind of things there. So the question is, how are you getting that information there? So the way our clients have done it, and there's a couple different ways to skin the cat, but they have a central database that has currently what the location of people are. And so, for instance, I know the location of a person, an asset, whatever it happens to be. So periodically, the mobile devices call back and insert their data into a central location, into a central data table, so that then I can use the built-in graphing, say in Alpha, which should have worked today, and I'm going to get that fixed, to show the information on, say, a map. But you can go to the next range with that, where in that you could be doing on-the-fly calculations on the Xbasic callback to, say, determine their distance from each other, determine the time away from each other, because you know in here when you store that data, you can get their you can get their heading and their speed. So you can do some rough estimations between that. And actually you can make subsequent calls that if you know the latitude and longitude, you can actually call you can call the Google and ask for the driving directions and how much time the person would normally take to go from point A to point B. So you can actually, instead of you doing the calculation, you can have Google do it. But again, that's limited by their API and other pieces here. So the question becomes, well, how's that happening? Now, the way that they have out in the field is that they have a timer on these mobile devices that periodically, a JavaScript timer that says every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, etc., push the data back to the server, and it does that. and that can be all automatic. The person doesn't have to do anything, and it also allows you, very excitingly, to do it behind the scenes, so it just kind of constantly happens in the app that's going on from that standpoint there. Now, another really cool opportunity is that if you don't want to necessarily have a central database on there, you can also use something called WebSockets, where what you can do is you can set up what's called a WebSocket, which we've done demos before, where you have all of your mobile devices listening to the server, and the server then so they register with the server saying, okay, I'm listening to the server, and then when the server updates something, it can call out to the devices versus the devices having to call in. So when the device when you log into the device, it registers with the server and sets up what's called a WebSocket that says, okay, I want to receive these messages from you, say like a employee location update. So now what happens is when the employees updates their location, the server will say, oh, I've got this new piece of data. It will look at who has registered to listen for that data, and then it pushes that out to all those mobile devices to then tell them, okay, here's the latest and greatest information. And that's really cool for dashboards and other technologies. So there's a couple different ways. Now, the benefit of that is that if their location isn't changing a whole lot, you don't necessarily want the people like sending their location every 5 minutes, everybody sending their location every 5 minutes. And also you don't want all these mobile devices calling the server saying, hey, I need all this data from where everybody is when nothing has changed. So you can use a combination of this mobile device location and WebSockets to really make a very efficient, only when needed data update to do what you're talking about there. So I'd say the first step is just you set up the mobile devices to, on a continual basis, update a central data location, in this case the database, which each person's location, their directions, their driving, etc. And then within that, when someone needs to know, hey, how far am I from Jim, they can run an Xbasic callback that says basically pull out the record for Jim, pull out my record, look at the difference between the two, do some simple known math to say what is the distance, maybe call a third-party API to say what is the driving time between those two locations, and then return that data back to the person out in the field. It's really fun and not very hard. I mean, basically what I did today is about the extent of the complexity you're going to find putting together that kind of application.
Excellent. Thanks very much. This could be devoted to a separate webinar, but actually I think we can, so I think that's a great one. And so could this future topic here, which I'm going to bring up right now, which says that if you have, could you sort of provide some sort of overview for how you would structure a PhoneGap application that's very large? Because typically you have a UX component and it's just one component, but let's say you're building like this monster application, 80 screens, whatever. How would you go about doing that, and sort of what should we know?
I'm not going to handle that, Dave, because you're right. I think it deserves 20, 30 minutes of time, because we only have a few minutes here, and I'd rather not do it. But that's an outstanding one. Yep. We'll queue that up next because it's we've done it before. We have experience on that. I'll actually do a quick example of how to do that and explain some of the different aspects of how to communicate between the different things. Yeah, there's definitely a strategy on that, and there's some really cool, powerful sort of benefits that come from that technology. So I'll line that up and we'll get that done, because I think that's something that's very valuable for people. We appreciate the individual. We hate to make you wait a little bit, but we'll get to that as soon as possible, so you can have a bit of information on how to structure a larger application like that.
Great. You mentioned WebSockets, and that brought up a couple of questions here in our audience. One was, when you're using WebSockets, how many users can be using it at the same time before you start hurting server performance? And
enormous a number of servers. Actually, far more than the normal standard techniques of polling. Because here's the trick, is that on the server, it's here's an example where we kind of came from, is that we had an application where we had field service people, and the field service people were sending in all this information to keep them up to date, and they were polling data to say, give me my new work orders, give me my new work orders. And what they were finding out is that every person out in the field was making this call every so often, And the server was spending all of its time just saying, hey, nothing for you, nothing for you, nothing for you. But it even, when it called, it had to do a query and stuff like that. So the team drove the capability of using WebSockets. So now the server is kind of the deciding factor. The server sits there and says, okay, anybody who needs information, register it with me. So when these mobile apps come alive and wake up, they say, okay, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm here, I need this information. And then the WebSocket technology takes over, where the server says, great, okay, I know what you want. And so it on the back end is maybe every 5 minutes monitoring stuff or doing something, and then it says, oh, I've got a condition where I need to update everybody. So then the first thing it does says, okay, well, who gets this information? Because not everybody needs to get it. In fact, there's ways to handle it where you can have what are called subscriptions that allow you to say, I only want these kind of updates. So once you've done that, then the server spits that information out to the apps in the field. So therefore, it's only doing work when it really necessarily has to. So you're going to see the performance difference between a polling environment, which is very compute intensive because the server has to listen, grab information, decide what to do, and report back, whereas now the server can be doing what it wants to do, and only when it needs to talk to that one is then spit out the information to that, or send it out to those individual people. And we saw after a specific client switched their methodology, they were able to handle 10 times as many people on that same server for this kind of operation, because the people on the field would sync the data in the morning, they'd register their items, and then they'd be offline doing nothing until the server decided they needed to send some information back to those people in the field. So therefore, the amount of server requirements went down because it didn't have this polling mechanism that would just crush a server and really hurt its performance, because the server would be sitting there just responding these requests over and over and over again. So you're going to see a significant increase in performance and sort of ability to handle things with the WebSocket technology. And there's some great examples and videos showing you how to create like a little chat client using it, and it's really very straightforward kind of code, not very tricky.
That's great, because we had another question about WebSockets, which was how would you use it? You may not have time to demo it, but how would you use it to refresh a pin on the map?
Oh, okay. So the basic concept behind a WebSocket, and I'm going to use this here, is that actually, let me go ahead and now show you kind of what it is. So let's duplicate this, okay? So I'm going to get rid of this because there's no callback. And update pin JavaScript. Okay, so how a WebSocket works is that when this launches, it tells the app server, hey, I'm waiting for these messages. The messages are simply JavaScript. So they're little pieces of JavaScript that when so the app server says, okay, I need to update this person's location. So therefore, everybody who's listening to this needs to move that pin. So what they do is in here, what happens is that you generate the JavaScript that says move that pin. You send that JavaScript to the mobile device. The mobile device just says, hey, I got a piece of JavaScript, run it. And it runs that JavaScript. And in this case, it could be a pre-made piece of JavaScript that says, talk to this map component on the mobile device and take this pin and move it to location X on the mobile device. And so the idea is that all you're going to do is use JavaScript. So the same methodology, if you had a button on here that said move that pin, you would just look at the JavaScript that does that, and instead of doing it on a button here, you would have the app server generate that JavaScript and send it through the WebSocket to this device, and this device is just listening and says, oh, the server's calling me. Oh, okay, here, great, I'm ready. Give me my command, and it gives them a little JavaScript command, and then it just runs that JavaScript command, which in this case would move a pin on a map, and that's all there is to it. So it's very efficient because the Alpha App Server just says, here you go, here's your JavaScript, good luck, have fun, do what you need to do. There are mechanisms to make sure that you have integrity, that if, for instance, this is not available, it'll queue up these items and resend them over time. So if it sends out a WebSocket message to an app that's offline, it queues them up so the person doesn't lose critical data. A lot of that stuff is built into the WebSocket technology. And again, very efficient, very straightforward, but you're just going to throw it some JavaScript, and that's all it works. And if you go watch there's a video that shows how they use. It actually does a good job of showing you the JavaScript that is sent down and how it's used on the mobile device to then, in this case, update, say, a message screen with some information of messages coming in.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And it looks like we have run out of time. So I want to thank everyone. Thank you, Dion, first of all, for presenting. And I want to thank everyone who wrote in with questions and participated today. And I really do like that new idea for a topic of building big, monstrous mobile applications. So we'll take a look at tackling that one. In the meantime, if you do have any other questions or ideas for topics that you would like to see us cover in the future, please send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. Also, today's session was recorded, and to find a copy of this recording, which will be available in about a day or so, as well as other recordings, you can find them at videos.alphasoftware.com. Thanks again, and we hope to see you at a future webinar. Take care, and goodbye.